I live alone in a house just outside of the city. This happened a couple of years ago. One night, I got home from work pretty late. It was sometime after 10 o'clock, and I was already exhausted after I got inside. I didn't do much. I just started getting ready for bed right away. I remember I was in the bathroom, which is across the hallway from my bedroom, when I suddenly heard a door downstairs close. As soon as I heard it, I froze. I stood there for a few seconds, listening carefully, trying to hear anything else, but everything went completely quiet. After a moment, I walked out of the bathroom and went downstairs to check. When I got down there, I didn't see anything out of place. Then I noticed that one of the windows was slightly open. I figured the wind must have pushed the door shut, which had happened before, so it didn't seem like a big deal. I went over, closed the window, and then headed back upstairs. I finished getting ready, turned off the lights, and got into bed. Everything was quiet again. I closed my eyes and tried to go to sleep, but then I heard something. It was faint at first, like a sound coming from downstairs. I couldn't tell exactly what it was. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe just the house settling or something like that. But I kept listening, and the sound didn't stop. It slowly became clearer. It sounded like movement, like someone walking. At that point, I sat up in bed. My heart started beating faster as I tried to listen more carefully. Then I realized the sound wasn't just downstairs anymore. It was getting closer. It sounded like someone was coming up the stairs. That's when I knew someone was inside my house. I immediately got out of bed and rushed to my bedroom door. I shut it and locked it as fast as I could. Then I grabbed my phone from the other side of the room. My hands were shaking as I tried to call 911. Before I could even say anything, I heard the footsteps outside my room. They were right there, just on the other side of the door. I froze. I didn't want to make any noise. I didn't want whoever it was to know exactly where I was. The operator answered, but I couldn't speak, yet I just stayed silent, holding the phone. Then I heard the handle move. Someone tried to open the door. It didn't open because it was locked after a few seconds. The handle stopped moving, and the footsteps slowly walked away. I stayed completely still, listening. I couldn't tell where they went. After a moment, I finally managed to speak and told the operator what was happening. I stayed in my room with the door locked and remained on the call. The police arrived pretty quickly, within a few minutes, while I was waiting. I didn't hear anything else when they got there. They searched the entire house and outside as well, but they didn't find anyone. The front door was unlocked though, and I'm almost certain it wasn't like that before. I never found out who was inside my house or how they got in. The only thing I could think of was the window I had left slightly open earlier. It's strange because seeing that window made me feel better at the time, thinking it explained the noise, when in reality, it might have been how someone got inside. Since that night, nothing like it has happened again, and I hope it stays that way. Many years ago, I used to live alone in a small apartment in an old building. It wasn't a very nice place, but it was quiet most of the time, and I had gotten used to it over the year that I'd been living there. My unit was on the second floor, near the end of a long hallway, and because the walls were thin, you could usually hear when someone walked by or opened their door, but it never really bothered me because it didn't happen very often. One night I was by myself. I had been home for a few hours already, and it was sometime around 9 p.m. I was sitting in the living room just relaxing, not really doing anything, when I started hearing footsteps out in the hallway. At first it sounded normal, just someone passing by, But then I noticed something strange. The footsteps didn't go away. They kept coming back and forth over and over again. It sounded like someone was walking up and down the hallway right outside my apartment. I remember sitting there listening for a while, trying to figure out if I was imagining it, but the sound was clear and consistent. Slow, steady footsteps, repeating in the same pattern. After a few minutes, I started to feel a little uneasy because it didn't make sense for someone to just keep walking back and forth like that. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, so I got up and walked toward the door. I stood there for a second, then leaned in and looked through the peephole. At first, I didn't see anything, just the empty hallway and the dim lights. Then after a few seconds, I heard the footsteps again, and I watched as a man walked past my door. He was tall, thin, and had slightly long, messy hair. I didn't recognize him as anyone who lived in the building, but I assumed maybe he was visiting someone. He walked down the hallway and disappeared from view. I kept watching for a moment, and just as I was about to step away, I heard the footsteps again coming back. I leaned in closer to look. The man walked past my door again, but this time as he reached it, he suddenly stopped. He didn't just slow down, he stopped completely right in front of my door. Then slowly he turned his head and looked directly at it. It felt like he knew I was standing there watching him. I immediately stepped back, my heart racing. I didn't want to look again. Something about the way he stopped like that didn't feel right at all. A few seconds later, I heard a knock on the door. I froze. I already had a bad feeling that it was him. I didn't move. I didn't answer. The knocking continued, slow at first, then louder. He would knock for a few seconds, stop, and then start again. This went on for several minutes, each time getting more aggressive, until it turned into pounding loud, heavy hits against the door. It echoed through the apartment. I could feel it. I could hear the handle move as he tried to open it, but it was locked. I backed away further into the living room, hoping he would just leave, but he didn't. He kept alternating between banging on the door and trying the handle. It felt like it went on for a long time. Then suddenly I heard another voice out in the hallway. I recognized it as my neighbor from across the hall. He must have come out to see what was going on. Because of all the noise, the banging stopped, and I could hear them talking. I couldn't make out exactly what they were saying, but it sounded tense. Then out of nowhere, the voices turned into shouting, and within seconds it sounded like a fight, loud movement, struggling, something hitting the wall. I rushed toward the door, and this time I opened it. When I looked out, I saw my neighbor on the ground, holding his face, and just for a moment I saw the other man running down the hallway. He reached the end quickly and disappeared. I ran over to my neighbor and asked if he was okay. He said the man had suddenly punched him and attacked him when he tried to ask what he was doing. I helped him sit up, and then I went back inside to call the police. We waited there in the hallway for a while until they arrived. They looked around the building and checked outside, but the man was gone. No one knew who he was, and no one had seen him before. After that night, he never came back, and I never heard those footsteps again. I still don't know why he was outside my door or what he wanted, but I can't forget the way he stopped and looked directly at it like he knew I was inside. Last summer, a group of my friends and I decided to rent an Airbnb for the weekend to celebrate one of our birthdays. We wanted somewhere quiet and a little isolated, so we could relax without worrying about noise or neighbors. After searching for a while, we found a cabin in a remote mountain area. It looked perfect in the pictures. A cozy wooden house surrounded by tall trees with a porch wrapping all the way around it. The place seemed peaceful and private, exactly what we were looking for. The reviews were mostly good, but there were a few comments mentioning that the host was a little too involved, checking in often, and being around more than expected. We didn't think much of it at the time, and actually saw it as a positive. We arrived on a Friday evening just before sunset. The area was even more isolated than we expected. No nearby houses, no lights, just trees and the sound of wind. The host was already there waiting for us. His name was Mark. He seemed friendly, calm, and welcoming. He told us that we would have the main cabin to ourselves, and that he stayed in a smaller building somewhere else on the property, just in case we needed anything. We settled in, unpacked our things, and started the night. Normally, we cooked, played music, talked, and just enjoyed being there. Everything felt fine. At first, it wasn't until the second night that things started to feel off. It was around 10 p.m. when we heard a knock on the front door. It caught us off guard because we weren't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, it was Mark standing there, holding a small tray with drinks. He smiled and said he just wanted to check if everything was okay, and if we needed anything. We told him we were fine and thanked him, but it felt a little strange that he showed up that late. He stayed for a few seconds longer than necessary, looking inside before finally leaving. We tried to ignore it and went back to what we were doing about an hour later. While we were sitting in the living room, I thought I saw something move outside the window. Just a quick shadow passing by on the porch. I didn't say anything at first, thinking it might have been my imagination, but then one of my friends asked if anyone else saw that. We all went quiet. We slowly got up and went to check outside. The porch was empty. There was nothing there. We came back inside trying to laugh it off. But the mood had definitely changed a little while later. Another one of my friends said she saw someone standing outside for a second near the same window, just standing there, looking in. But when we rushed to check again, there was nothing by midnight. We were all a bit uneasy, but still trying to act normal. Then we heard another knock this time. It was louder when we opened the door. Mark was there again, but this time, he wasn't holding anything. He asked if everything was all right and said he thought he heard noises coming from outside near the house. Something about the way he said it felt off, like he already knew what was happening. We told him everything was fine and that we hadn't noticed anything unusual. He looked at us for a moment, then nodded and left after he walked away. We all agreed that something didn't feel right anymore. The next morning we decided to go out for a short hike around the area, just to clear our heads while we were getting ready. I noticed something strange in the corner of the living room, a small reflection of light coming from behind one of the decorative objects. I walked closer and moved it slightly, and that's when I saw it, a tiny camera hidden behind it. At first I thought I was mistaken, but when I looked closer, it was obvious. I called everyone over and showed them suddenly. Everything started to make sense. We began searching the rest of the cabin carefully, and we found more, one in the living room, another in the bedroom, and one hidden in a place that made all of us feel sick. They were all placed in spots where they could see everything. Whoever installed them knew exactly what they were doing. We didn't even need to say it out loud. We all knew the person outside the window. The night before the repeated visits, the way he kept checking on us. It had to be him. We didn't want to stay there another second. We quickly packed our things without even finishing getting ready. None of us wanted to confront him, we just wanted to leave. We put the keys on the table, grabbed our bags, and walked out as fast as we could, trying not to look around too much the entire time. It felt like we were being watched. We got into the car and drove away without saying much. Once we finally reached an area with signal, I immediately opened the app and left a detailed review warning anyone who might consider staying there later. We reported everything, the cameras, the behavior, everything. I don't know what happened to him after that, but I still think about that place sometimes and the way it felt like we were never really alone, even when we thought we were. This happened about a year ago. I'm a pretty normal guy. I work a regular job and live alone, and I go to the gym almost every day around the same time. One day I got a random ad on Snapchat from a girl I didn't recognize, which almost never happens to me, so I figured it was probably fake, but I was curious and added it back anyway. Not long after that, she sent me a snap. It was a selfie of a blonde girl around my age. Nothing seemed off about it. She just said, "Hi." So I sent one back. We started talking, and she told me her name was Lily and that she had seen me at the gym a few times. She said she wanted to talk to me there before, but didn't want to interrupt me. I wasn't completely sure if I remembered her, but she seemed normal and easy to talk to, and the conversation felt real. After talking for a couple of days, she asked if I wanted to meet up sometime. I said yes. She told me she worked at a place downtown and that we could meet at a park across the street after she finished around 9 p.m. Looking back, meeting at a park that late was a little strange, but at the time, I didn't think too much about it that night. I drove there and parked in the lot. When I looked around, I noticed there was only one other car there. I texted her to let her know I had arrived, but she didn't reply right away, so I just sat there, waiting. After a few minutes, I started to feel a little unsure. Then she finally texted back saying she was already inside the park and that I should come meet her something about. That didn't feel right. I had been sitting there the whole time and didn't see anyone go in. I stayed in the car thinking about it, trying to decide what to do. Then I saw the door of the other car open. A man stepped out wearing a hoodie. I couldn't see his face clearly. He looked around for a second and then started walking straight toward my car. That's when I knew something was wrong. The way he was walking didn't seem normal, like he already knew where I was. As he got closer, I didn't wait. I started the car and drove off immediately. I didn't look back. I just kept driving until I was far away. A little later, I blocked the account. When I thought about everything again, it all started to make sense. The random ad, the single picture, no real social media, and the way she got me to come there. I don't know what would have happened if I had stepped out of the car, but I'm sure it wouldn't have been good ever since then. I don't trust things like that anymore because sometimes the person you think you're talking to isn't real at all. This happened a few years ago when I was still in high school. It was early in the school year and everything was still kind of new. One day I noticed that I got added on Snapchat by a guy. I didn't recognize, his name didn't seem familiar at all. So I ignored it and deleted the request a couple of days later. I saw the same name add me again, and once again I deleted it. After the second time, I didn't really think much about it until a few days later when I realized that I had actually seen him before he was in one of my classes. He usually sat somewhere in the back while I sat closer to the front, so I never really paid attention to him, but I remembered his face. He was a new student and didn't seem to talk to anyone. Not long after that, he added me again for a third time. This time I decided to add him back, just because I knew he went to my school, and I thought maybe it wasn't a big deal. Almost immediately, he sent me a snap. It was just a normal selfie with no text, so I sent one back, but then he started sending more pictures, a lot more. Some of them were random, like the floor or desks, but it still felt a little strange, so I stopped replying. Later that day, we had the same class together, and I didn't check my phone at all until the very end, when class was basically over. When I finally looked, I saw a lot of notifications from him when I opened them. My stomach dropped. They were all pictures of me taken during class from where he was sitting in the back. I quickly went through them, and there were so many, all from different moments when I wasn't even aware. It made me really uncomfortable when the bell rang. I decided to say something. I caught up to him in the hallway and asked him why he took those pictures of me. He didn't answer. He just stood there looking at me. I told him it was weird and that he needed to stop before I could say anything else. He suddenly turned and walked away quickly. After that, I deleted him from Snapchat and didn't want anything to do with him. A few days passed, and everything seemed normal again, until he added me for a fourth time. This time, I blocked him immediately. That same day after school, I got in my car and started driving home. About a few minutes into the drive, I noticed a car behind me. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but after a while, I realized it was still there, following every turn I made. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I looked more carefully and realized it was him. He was driving behind me the whole time. I had never seen him driving before, and I didn't think he lived anywhere near me. The more I drove, the more it felt like he was following me on purpose. I didn't want him to know where I lived. So when I got close to my area, I pulled over to the side of the road. His car slowed down as he got closer. For a moment, I thought he was going to stop, but instead, he just drove past me and kept going. I waited there for a few seconds before continuing home. After that, I made sure to completely ignore him at school. I never talked to him again, and he didn't try to contact me after that. About a week or two later, I stopped seeing him in class altogether. Eventually, I heard that he had transferred to another school. I don't know why, but I was relieved because that whole situation was something I never wanted to deal with again. I live alone in a small house that I moved into a few years ago. It's in a fairly normal neighborhood, nothing particularly isolated or creepy about it, which is probably why what happened felt even stranger. At the time, I had only been living there for around 6 months, and I was still getting used to the area. One night, completely out of nowhere, I woke up to an extremely loud banging sound coming from downstairs. At first, I was disoriented and half asleep, so it took me a moment to realize what I was hearing. Someone was pounding on my front door, not knocking. Actually pounding. The sound was aggressive enough to wake me instantly. I checked my phone for the time. It was just before 2 a.m. That immediately made me uneasy. Nobody visits at that hour unless something is seriously wrong. I got out of bed and stood there listening for a moment while the banging continued. It was loud, fast, and constant, like whoever was outside was desperate for me to answer. I slowly left my bedroom and started walking towards the front of the house. But just as I got close to the door, the pounding suddenly stopped. The silence afterwards felt even worse. I stood there for a few seconds, listening carefully. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no movement outside. Eventually, I looked through the small window beside my front door. There was nobody there. I checked my driveway, the pavement, even the street, completely empty. That honestly confused me more than anything. Whoever had just been outside had either left unbelievably fast or was hiding somewhere I couldn't see. Against my better judgment, I opened the door and looked outside. Still nothing. No cars, no people, nothing at all. I locked the door again and stayed awake for another half hour, trying to make sense of what had happened. Eventually, since nothing else happened, I convinced myself it was probably some kind of prank and went back to bed. But the following night, something happened again. This time, I woke up to a completely different sound. A car horn. At first, I thought it was coming from somewhere further down the street, but it kept going. Long honks. Over and over again. It sounded close. Very close. So I got out of bed and walked back towards the front of the house. As I got near the window, I looked outside and saw a car parked in my driveway. I didn't recognize it. The headlights were off, but the horn was blaring repeatedly. Whoever was inside was clearly trying to get my attention. Because it was so dark outside, I couldn't make out who was behind the wheel. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide what to do. Finally, I unlocked the front door and opened it slightly. The second I did, the horn stopped immediately. No delay, just silence. Then the car reversed out of my driveway and sped away so quickly that I barely had time to process what had happened. Within seconds, it was gone. I didn't get the registration plate. I didn't see the driver. Nothing. At that point, I was certain it had to be the same person from the previous night. But I had absolutely no idea why someone was doing this. I considered calling the police then, but honestly, I felt ridiculous trying to explain it. Nothing had technically happened. No break-in, no damage. Just someone deliberately messing with me. So against my better judgment, I let it go. A couple of nights passed with nothing unusual, and I started thinking maybe it was finally over. Then one morning, as I was leaving for work, I opened my front door and immediately noticed something taped to it. A folded note. I pulled it off and unfolded it. Inside, written in black ink, were 5 words. I'll be back next week. That was it. Nothing else. No name. No explanation. No joke. Nothing. That was enough for me. I finally went to the police and reported everything, including the note. They took it seriously enough to file a report, although one officer suggested it might just be someone playing a prank. Maybe, but it certainly didn't feel like one. The following week, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me nervous. I kept checking the windows, checking the locks, and expecting something to happen again. But strangely, nothing ever did. No more banging, no more car, no more notes. And to this day, I still have no idea who was outside my house those nights, or what they wanted. A few years ago, I was living alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of an older building. The place itself wasn't bad at all. It was actually pretty quiet, and for the most part, I enjoyed living there. I only stayed for about a year because that was the length of my lease, but something happened near the end of it that made me certain I wasn't renewing. One night, sometime around 11 p.m., I was getting ready to go to bed. My usual routine was simple. I'd turn off the lights in the kitchen, check that my front door was locked, and then close the blinds in my living room before going to sleep. My living room had a large glass sliding door that led to a tiny balcony overlooking the parking lot below. My car was parked almost directly in view, which was convenient because I could usually see it clearly from upstairs. That night, as I was reaching to close the blinds, I happened to glance down at the parking lot and noticed someone standing beside my car. At first, I assumed maybe it was just someone walking by or looking for their own vehicle. But after a few seconds, I realized the man wasn't just standing there. He was checking my car. He walked around it slowly, looked through the windows, and then tried opening the driver's side door. That immediately got my attention. Without really thinking, I slid open the balcony door and stepped outside. I called down to him and said something like, "Hey, that's my car." The second I said that, the man stopped and looked up at me. He didn't seem startled at all. That's what made the whole thing feel strange. Normally, if someone is messing with a car and gets caught, you'd expect them to run off or at least pretend they had the wrong vehicle. But he didn't do either. He just stood there, staring up at me for several long seconds. I remember asking him what he was doing, but he never answered, not a word. Eventually, he started walking away from my car. For a second, I felt relieved, assuming he was finally leaving. But instead of heading toward the street or another part of the lot, he started walking directly toward my apartment building. That was the moment I got uncomfortable. From where I was standing, I could see him approach the entrance, but once he got close enough, he disappeared from my view. I couldn't tell if he actually went inside or kept walking. Still, something about it didn't sit right with me. I went back inside, locked the balcony door, shut the blinds, and tried to brush it off. Maybe he lived there, I told myself. Maybe I was overreacting. But not even 2 minutes later, I heard movement outside my apartment door. Then I heard my doorknob move, just slightly, like someone was trying to open it. I froze. I walked quietly toward the living room and stared at the front door from a distance, just listening. A few seconds later, it happened again. This time, more deliberate. Someone was definitely testing the handle. My heart started pounding. I checked to make sure the door was locked, which thankfully it was, and after a few quiet moments, I slowly leaned forward to look through the peephole. Standing outside my apartment was the exact same man I had just seen next to my car. He was standing completely still, facing my door. I stepped back immediately. A few seconds later, he knocked, not loudly, just 3 slow knocks. I didn't answer, obviously. I just stood there silently, waiting for him to leave. After about 20 or 30 seconds, I heard footsteps moving away. Eventually, everything went quiet again. I barely slept that night. For the next few weeks, I was constantly on edge whenever I came home. Then, maybe a month later, I saw him one more time. I had just gotten home from work and walked into the building lobby. I got into the elevator and pressed my floor. Right before the doors closed, I looked down the hallway and saw him. Same clothes, same face. He had clearly seen me too, because he immediately started walking faster toward the elevator, then faster, almost running. Luckily, the door shut before he got there. I remember just staring at the closing doors, hoping they would close faster. When I got to my floor, I rushed to my apartment, locked the door behind me, and stayed inside the rest of the night. He never came back to my door after that, and I never saw him again. But I moved out 2 months later, and to this day, I still think about how easily that night could have gone very differently. I used to live in an old apartment when I was younger. It was actually an old house that had been converted into a duplex. My side had a small kitchen, a living room, one bedroom, and a bathroom. There was also a staircase leading down to a tiny entrance area and the front door. On the other side of the building was another apartment with a very similar layout, although I never really knew who lived there. I stayed in that apartment for several months. It was cheap, close to my workplace, and convenient enough. Other than that, there was nothing particularly special about it. For the first month or so, everything was completely normal. I worked long hours, so I wasn't home very often, and whenever I was there, I never had any issues. But after a while, something strange started happening. There were a few nights when I noticed I had been waking up in the middle of the night. The first time, I didn't think much of it. I simply woke up for no obvious reason, then went straight back to sleep. The second time was slightly different. I remember waking up because I thought I heard some kind of noise. But when I sat up and listened, there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just silence. Eventually, I lay back down and fell asleep again. At the time, I didn't think too deeply about it, but it was unusual for me. I normally slept very well and almost never woke up during the night. Then, within the same week, it happened a third time. Again, I woke up suddenly with the strong feeling that I had heard something. I sat up in bed and listened carefully. Still nothing. That was when it started to bother me. I couldn't tell if I was imagining things, hearing noises in my sleep, or if something was actually waking me up. After a while, with no explanation, I went back to sleep. Then, one night, things escalated. I woke up again. This time, I don't remember hearing a sound first. What I do remember is how instantly awake I felt. Not groggy, not confused, wide awake. As if something had triggered me to wake up. I stayed lying down for a moment, then slowly rolled over to face the rest of the room. Everything was completely dark. Then I heard it. A quiet creaking sound. Very small, but unmistakable. It sounded exactly like my bedroom door being opened slowly. I stared toward the doorway, and then I saw it. The door was opening. Slowly, very slowly. A figure appeared in the gap. Then someone stepped into my room. It was a man. Because of how dark it was, I couldn't make out any details of his face. He only took a single step inside and then stopped. He didn't come any closer. He just stood there. I was completely frozen, too scared to move, too scared to even breathe properly. It was so dark that I honestly couldn't tell if he knew I was awake or not. Then, after a few seconds, the man reached into his pocket and pulled something out. A camera. A second later, a bright flash lit up the room. He had taken a picture of me. That was the moment pure panic hit me. Before I could react, he stepped backwards and disappeared into the hallway again. A moment later, I heard faint creaking sounds from outside my room. Then another sound, a door opening and closing, quietly. After that, silence, complete silence. I sat there in bed for what felt like forever, probably 10 or 15 minutes, just staring at the doorway, terrified he might come back. Eventually, when I hadn't heard anything for a long time, I forced myself to get out of bed. I checked my bedroom first. Nothing. Then I slowly stepped into the hallway and turned on the light. Still nothing. No sounds. No movement. No sign of anyone. I checked every room in the apartment. My place was very small, so it didn't take long to realize the person was gone. Then I reached the far end of the upstairs hallway near a closet across from my bedroom. That's when I figured out what had happened. There was an old connecting door leading directly into the neighboring apartment. I had been told when I moved in that the door was no longer used and was permanently locked. It was painted the same color as the wall, and there was even a small table with a lamp placed in front of it, so it barely looked like a door at all. But now it all made sense. The man had clearly entered through that door. Apparently, while it may have been locked from my side, it wasn't locked from the other side. I didn't sleep at all that night. The following morning, I contacted building management immediately and reported everything. I also started searching for another apartment that same day. For the next several nights, I stayed at a friend's house. Eventually, management investigated, and it turned out there really was a man living in the neighboring apartment. He was caught soon afterwards. Thankfully, he never entered my apartment again. Looking back, I'm almost certain the earlier nights when I kept waking up were probably the nights he had already been inside, and I was only waking when he quietly left through that connecting door. To this day, I still cannot forget the sight of that man standing silently in my bedroom doorway. It remains the creepiest experience of my entire life.